Sometimes there are ideas or designs in Pokemon that are actually put into the games, but then end up going completely unused and are just left to be forgotten. So today I thought it would be a fun idea to take a look back through the years and see what are the top 10 cancelled / forgotten things in Pokemon. As a general rule, for the main series titles, I'm only going to feature things that were actually put into the game but never saw the light of day. I find it fascinating that certain features can be cancelled so late on into the game's development to the point that there are actually remnants proving their existence within the game's code. And I really wanted to shed some light on it. So this means no beta designs or anything like that, even though some of them do look really cool. Also, no games that were released only in Japan, because I have an entire video talking about a bunch of those already, which you should totally check out. Anyway, let's begin! Number 10. Generation 2 Safari Zone. The Safari Zone is a very well-loved mechanic that dates way back to Generation 1, and ended after Generation 4. But did you know that in Generation 2 it was actually absent? While this is strange, what's stranger is that there's an unused map in the same location that the Safari Zone was in Generation 1. It's incomplete and not on the same scale, but it's interesting to think that the Safari Zone, or at least something in its place, was planned for Gold and Silver. But what made them decide against including it in the final version? Clearly, the idea of the Safari Zone was one that Game Freak liked, because they continued to use it in subsequent games and didn't even remove it until Black and White. Generation 2's remakes even had a hugely improved Safari Zone 2, albeit in a different place, with the original being replaced by Pal Park. Number 9. The Member Card in Oak's Letter and Diamond and Pearl. These two events from Generation 4 activate in-game events that allow you to capture the legendary Pokemon Darkrai and Shaman. They were distributed over Wi-Fi in 2009 for Platinum, but were clearly planned for Diamond and Pearl. Why this was done isn't fully understood, but the events are programmed into Diamond and Pearl and the areas can be accessed through the use of the tweaking glitch. The actual Pokemon themselves were released through various events before the items were released for Platinum, so at least players of all versions were able to obtain the event Pokemon. Number 8. The Old Sea Map. For the most part, I've tried not to include features on this list that were only released in Japan, but I still wanted to talk about this one. The Old Sea Map is an event item existing only in Pokemon Emerald that allows you to access Faraway Island, the location of Mew. The strange thing is, it's the only Generation 3 event item not to see a worldwide release. The Eon ticket, Mystic ticket, and Aurora ticket were all released worldwide, but Mew saw no such luck. The data for the event still exists within English versions of Pokemon Emerald, but without the item to trigger the event, the Faraway Island Mew became unobtainable outside of Japan. Number 7. The Azure Flute. Probably one of the most infamous items in Pokemon, the Azure Flute was originally intended to trigger an event that would allow the player to capture the legendary Pokemon Arceus. But unlike Darkrai and Shaman's items, this item wasn't distributed anywhere, in any of the 3 versions. Several years later, during an interview leading up to the release of Pokemon X and Y, Junichi Masuda himself revealed that he made the decision not to release it after all, because he thought that the process may be too confusing for players to understand. What? Yeah, granted, the other 2 event items have a direct location in their description, so probably are easier to use, but still, it might just be me. But if I were given a legendary flute in-game, the first place I think to play it would be, I don't know, somewhere that had major significance in the main story? And guess where you play it? Amity Square. It's Spear Pillar. I find the reasoning behind the cancellation of this item more confusing than the item itself, but I still thought it was worthy of a mention on this list. Number 6. Pokemon Picross for Game Boy Color. Here's an interesting one that I mentioned in a video quite some time ago if you've a good memory. It's interesting because to our knowledge this is the only Pokemon game that has been cancelled mid-production. Pokemon Picross was a game planned for the Game Boy Color in 1999. It was announced through various magazines with tons of promotional artwork and screenshots to showcase the game. But after this, nothing else came of it and Pokemon Picross never saw a release anywhere. Pokemon themed levels were added to unrelated Picross titles in the future, but the real reasons as to why this game was cancelled are still unknown. As a sort of resolution to this story, a 3DS title of the same name was released a decade and a half later at the end of 2015. Number 5. Shellos and Gastrodon. You've probably heard that the Sinnoh Pokemon Shellos and Gastrodon were confirmed to have originally been planned to be in Ruby and Sapphire, but were held back due to time constraints. While this in itself is very interesting, what I'd like to shed light on here would be a couple of designs for these Pokemon that went completely unused, but still remained in the game's data. This would include 2 back sprites for Shellos and Gastrodon. It's worth noting that there's only one for each Pokemon, considering they both have 2 forms. My best guess is that perhaps these back sprites portray the original designs for these Pokemon. But since they were held back from Generation 3, there was more time to develop their designs, so they came up with two forms. This is supported by the fact that the Shellos sprite is pretty much a combination of the two forms we ended up with, mostly looking like the Westy form, but it has flaps like the Easty form too. Gastrodon's early sprite looks more like its Westy form, with its design being more heavily shifted toward a ground type theme. Number 4. Altering Cave. This location in Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald probably stumped most players upon their first time seeing it. What was the point of this cave again? It has one empty room with the only Pokemon you can find being Zubat. Well, unsurprisingly, there was much more to this cave than would meet the eye. It turns out the Altering Cave was originally meant to be host to exclusive Pokemon appearances after the player used Mystery Gift at one of Nintendo's Event Wonder Spots. All of these Pokemon can actually be found in Emerald Safari Zone extension, with the exception of Smeargle, that can still be found in Artisan Cave. Presumably sometime late into Emerald's development, probably after the release of Fire and Leaf Green because they were released within months of each other. For whatever reason, Game Freak decided to shelve the idea of these events, and put the Pokemon into the game in different locations instead. It must have been pretty late on considering Altering Cave made it into the final cut of the game, only for it to become one of the most pointless locations ever. Number 3. Unused music tracks. I don't think that I mentioned enough how much I love the music of Pokemon games. It helps to create a unique feel for each location or event, and Pokemon just wouldn't be the same without it. Just like many different aspects of the games, a lot of time goes into the making of certain themes. They're just like Pokemon themselves, how they go through different phases of development, with little changes here and there taking place until the final piece is finished. And I'd be willing to bet that there are a lot of themes that are made, but discarded in favor of something else. Evidence of this is of course present in the game's data, with some hidden tracks being fully intact and hidden in the final game. The majority of these are simply tests of the game's new sound font using older tracks. For example, there are a ton of redone themes from Gold and Silver present in Ruby and Sapphire's data, with my favorite probably being the Team Rocket Takeover theme. There's also a redone version of Ruby and Sapphire's title music hidden in Diamond and Pearl, which sounds really cool too. Sometimes there will be completely unique themes in the final game that go unused too. There are a couple of cool ones in the original Mystery Dungeon, for example. And this super ominous one from Pokemon Yellow. I actually did a whole video talking about these a really long time ago, so if you're interested in hearing more about these unused music tracks, then that video will be part of my end screen and in the description. Number 2. The GS Ball. Let's be real, you knew it'd be on here. Outside of the games, if I were to ask you what first came to mind when talking about cancelled or forgotten things in Pokemon, this is probably first on the list. First appearing in the show in the first episode of the Orange Island section of the anime, this super special Pokeball was tossed around from person to person with no resolution for 61 episodes, before Ash and friends just left it with Kurt. That's the end. Turns out the GS Ball was originally meant to contain the legendary Pokemon Celebi, which would then go on to play a major role in the Johto section of the anime. But once it was decided that Celebi would instead star in its own movie, the writers were left with a tough decision. Hey, what do we do with the GS Ball? I don't know, maybe we should give it to Kurt. The kids will forget about it. Are you sure about that? Yeah, of course they will. Like the old C-Map, the GS Ball in-game is an event item that was only ever released in Japan. That in itself is worthy of a mention, but contrary to what the writers wanted, I'm sure that we'll always remember the GS Ball as the pointless plot device that ended up spanning nearly a year and a half's worth of episodes. Number 1. Eternal Flower Floette. Honestly, this is the main reason that I wanted to make this list. The cancelled feature that interests me the most also happens to be the most recent one. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of X and Y. AZ is a very significant character and his backstory plays a key role in tying up the main story. It's so sad. His cherished Pokemon is a Floette with a unique form, which he then reunites with at the end. This isn't just part of the cutscene though. AZ's Floette is a fully programmed Pokemon with its own stats and everything. It has its own signature move, being Light of Ruin, a menu sprite, and even a shiny form. Initially I dismissed this factor because pretty much every Pokemon has a shiny form, but evidently they could have refrained from giving it one, considering regular form Magina, a Pokemon that is legitimately obtainable in Sun and Moon, just straight up doesn't have one. Well, it does, but it's exactly the same. And I don't even mean on a Garchomp level. It's exactly the same. It was believed that this Floette would eventually be released as an event, but that possibility is looking less and less likely as time goes on. Generation 6 is just as good as over, so it's unlikely that any events will be released for it anytime soon. Rest in peace, Battle Frontier. All hope isn't lost yet though, considering it was discovered that Eternal Flower Floette still exists within Sun and Moon, which is certainly deliberate considering the cosplay Pikachu forms were removed. But the fact that this Pokemon not only existed, but was given a lot of special treatment with new stats, a signature move and so on, but then went unused for an entire generation is just fascinating. But I think that just about does it for my top 10 cancelled / forgotten things in Pokemon. As always, if you can think of something that didn't make the list, then leave a comment down below. As with the last video, I am still taking requests for top 10s, and even those fun little 20 lists I sometimes do. So if there's something you'd like to see, then let me know, because if I end up doing your suggestion, then you'll be featured in that video. I'm sorry my trivia videos have kind of been all over the place lately. This is partially due to the fact that I've been doing a lot of traveling lately. I'm actually in America right now, and I've been doing preparation for a special set of videos to celebrate 250k subscribers, which I'm really close to right now. So be sure to keep an eye out because I'm really excited to share it with you all when I hit 250k. But as always, thank you for watching and I will see you next time. Bye!